Hello everybody, my name is Rob Baird, I'm from the University of Southampton and I'm going to talk to you today about networks and particularly global, regional and local networks that we've been involved with and have researched and read about in relation to developing teacher education in the area of EMI. So a starting point we'd like to consider here is that often when people hear about EMI, their first idea is focused on language. So this relates to institutions and also educators. So we find people's first thought is about a classroom of students and how well they would be able to deliver a talk to those students in English, which is a source of anxiety, but also fails to take into account the range of pedagogical approaches, the goals of the learning objectives of the programs that they're teaching on, and the various practices that are around in the context. So this is often a reaction to EMI, which, as I say, is quite problematic and tends to both push people away from considerations of how they educate people in their first language, but also it tends to objectify language and give it characteristics that are not useful in the context of internationalization. So speaking of internationalization, so I'll start with the global network. So this is a Z-map taken from our MOOC. So on the first day of the MOOC, we asked people to place pins in the map to show where they're from. So this isn't everybody, this is just the first starting point of day one of the MOOC. And you can see immediately the diversity in the global EMI community. So people are engaged in EMI, people are discussing EMI, and they're willing to engage in networked learning from around the world. And there are lots of benefits of this, obviously, and some limitations as well, which I'll come to towards the end of this talk. An important element that we gain further understanding of is the importance of a focus on education. And we don't use the term EMI in Southampton, we use the term EME to emphasize education rather than instruction, because again, instruction links to that first reaction. This is about me standing in front of people, telling them what to do, telling them their subject. And education is much more a holistic view of how you can get students engaged in their own learning and how you can deliver what they need to learn to them if you have to deliver it. So I think this is reflected in a couple of areas of the Taiwanese initiatives that are currently taking place. The first one relates to this EMI enhancement plan, so section 2.1, which acknowledges that there are languages other than English that will be used, like in a likely scenario, in the classroom. Again, multilingual environment means that it's very likely people will engage with content using the resources they have, which include English. And this becomes very clear and very beneficial when people engage in networks and discuss how education works, although people operate with different policies. But the other important starting point here, and where networks become particularly useful, is that they contextualize English here as well. That this is not the English spoken by monolingual native speakers from particular places. This is English that is being used as a medium of communication. So it's not being judged for its fine qualities. It's not being held up as a model of great English for all to follow. This is characteristic of English in internationalization. It's an international language that various people use for their purposes. And the other point that I've highlighted here is the 70% of class communication. And from our engagement with network teacher development, it's very clear that a pattern exists of how that 70% can be facilitated, or more than that 70%, without harming the intercultural and multilingual environment, identities, and challenges that using English brings. And the solution tends to be pedagogical. So it tends to relate to what happens before that classroom and after that classroom to help facilitate the communication. So again, it seems when educators get into networks and engage in communication, they don't focus on improving their language so they can deliver content effectively to students, but rather facilitate the language challenge for themselves and for students to facilitate this kind of communication and learning that takes place over a longer period of time. Not that language learning is not important, but that the focus for facilitating this particular area as it comes out through networks or networked engagement, the focus tends to be on pedagogical solutions to this scenario. Another part of the local context of Taiwan that's particularly encouraging and interesting, I think, after years of engaging with EMI in different contexts, is this prioritization of teaching. So teaching is the core, focusing on self-learning, lifelong education, innovative teaching methods, establishing faculty communities. This is a good opportunity for Taiwan, I think, and it's useful for that it's useful to know that not every country is in this position. Lots of EMI policies are quite vague at best in relation to pedagogy, and certainly some of them don't prioritize this idea of innovation and learning and focus much more on delivery and the extent that English will be used, rather than how it will be used and what it will be used for. So very encouraging signs here that link to our bigger picture of EMI. So we'd like to emphasize the importance of the teaching medium and tools, assessment and aims, the field and purpose, the cultural and linguistic backgrounds, the learner needs, the affordances for learning that exist in that particular environment. So these are all parts of the context, and all of them will influence elements of language, content, pedagogy, and practice. And these are important to consider. And again, networks that engage with language, pedagogy, and content will engage with all those areas. They will engage with the complexity of what they're doing in a way that for top-down training is very difficult to do. So, for example, for instructing people to learn language better, it's very hard to understand what language they need. What don't they know? What do they need to know? Networked engagement is a way where people can proactively recognize what they need and what they don't have from engagement with other people and engagement with their fields through English. And the point in red there is really to emphasize a big part of our experience engaging with people that networks bring out is the importance of emotion. And both if you're going to have a big success with particular people, particular educators who are going to take to EMI who are going to educate others and bring people with them as they go into this area, they require motivation, investment, and confidence. And if EMI is going to struggle, if people are going to find it stressful, difficult, and find barriers to engaging with the EMI, it's often because of a lack of confidence, because of anxiety, or a lack of investment. And that can be harmful for anything else. So it's very hard to make any progress if the emotional state or the identities of people are not going with you. And so I think that's an important aspect of networked engagement and network development of educators. And something that comes out of those networks is this idea. I won't go through everything in the table at all, but this is just a summary of key ideas that emerge from educators when you get them together discussing issues and best practice in their fields. We can see a preference for pre-tasks, materials that are given to students before they enter the classroom. So even like a video, 6-minute video summarizing the topic can give them a lot of vocabulary. If that's put into a task, students can familiarize themselves with the key contexts, the key content and goals before they go into the classroom, which can facilitate, again, I'll go back to that 70%, the communication that takes place in the classroom. And there's less need in that situation for the teacher to be delivering the content in that live session. It becomes more open to different methods of teaching. And this is something really valued by teachers, obviously because they're in education and they want to be, or they know that their main driver is the learning objectives and helping students to achieve them. Likewise, the post-class activities are important too. So so if there's any kind of struggle with language, it's important that students are given some kind of activity to consolidate knowledge from the session and to have that space to think about what they'd learned, because the cognitive load during a class is high for people studying in a second language. So scales of networks. So I'm just going to finish by talking about different scales, so global, regional, and local networks. And so it's very interesting, as I said, to see what comes out of network communication, but then understanding how people can get the most out of networks and develop their career in the most useful ways. There are differences between these kind of scales of networks, and that's important to consider. So the global scale, so for example, the MOOC or there are various social media or organizations and events that people can engage with. Positives, it gives people access to people with similar characteristics. So in other countries, but they might have similar disciplines, similar levels, similar institution types. So although it might seem that different countries will be completely different, it's not always the case. And very often people can find, it's easier to find an equivalent institution or department in another country than it is locally, because local higher education institutions tend to diversify. There's a wider pool of experience and a point of comparison as well. So institutions and individuals can understand themselves better by engaging with a wide range of people. So they really understand where they are in terms of their needs and their abilities compared to others. So that's the global scale. The issues with this is it's very difficult to make this ongoing. This tends to come up as a one-off kind of like 4-week course or a 4-day conference, something like that. and it's not really integral or embedded in people's day-to-day roles. And research suggests it's very important in EMI that meaningful engagement is ongoing, regular, and embedded in people's roles. The regional scale, so we've got this becomes more focused and relevant. It's greater localization of that global knowledge. It's more ongoing, so greater potential for focus on needs. So lots of positives in this regional scale. However, it's still not fully embedded or integral. So it still exists beyond the institution and has limitations so it can influence the institution, but it's much harder to influence the individuals. It's also relying on others who might not be as invested or invested in the same way as on a local level. And then going to the local scale, we've got it's much more ongoing and needs responsive. It can be embedded and integral because the workloads of the people involved are dictated by that institution. So if the institution wants people to have space to be in a network, they can give them the motivation and give them the space to be able to do that. It can be mobilized for interaction with regional and global networks. So for example, disseminating good practice, giving papers, or producing research on pedagogical innovation, things like that. So various projects we've been involved with, the local scale reports to a wider network. And that's, I think, good practice if you can do that. It's likely to be longer lasting as well. So both in terms of the impact and the practices that take place. The big issue is its demanding of resources, particularly when English becomes a factor. If EMI is new to an institution, sometimes the institution will lack EAP expertise, EAP resources, and this can be an expensive problem to have. Also, where you develop a network, the institution has to meet the needs of the network, where the network can't help themselves. So things like, for example, academic publishing, people might highlight needs that they have because they're investing in internationalization. They might see it's important that they get support for academic publishing, which again can demand resources from the institution. Another difficulty is it can be difficult to match incentives, so incentivizing engagement with EMI and engaging with an EMI network without being divisive, because where people are in a network, other people might not be in the network. And if those other people think the people in the network are kind of integrated more, are able to get promotion, develop their career more effectively, might even be paid more, then that can become divisive. Also, there can be a lack of direction. So a local network that doesn't have any dialogue with regional networks or global networks can become a little bit I'm trying to say directionless, but they can develop local concerns that are not really related to current ideas of best practice or the best ways of going forward, and it can begin to lose that momentum and lose that motivation and become a bit of a kind of, it can slow down and start to lose its power as a network. So it's important to have the integration of the different elements if possible. So to summarize here, so we've got global, regional, and local networks are all useful, but that localization is essential. Localization is where this ongoing engagement with EMI, and investment in development can happen. It's very hard to have that on wider scales. Networks move EMI from English and towards education and communication, which I've said is a natural fit with this initiative. So here, I mean, that English can be seen as a subject. It can be seen as something that causes anxiety for people. When networks of people engage with best practice, engage with asking and answering questions, I think it becomes focused on how do we achieve our goals? How do we develop as professionals in our role? And that's much less intimidating for professional educators than English, which is often not what they've chosen to study in their lives. So that's a really important point of this endeavour that Taiwan is setting out. And finally, an important thing to consider is this idea that autonomy and community need to go hand in hand. And again, this is why we emphasize this network practice, because by nature, people contribute to a network and a network contributes to people. So the general way we see this working is that people need to develop their understanding. People need to be proactive in their self-development with the support of the network, and people need to be proactive in developing others. And again, institutions can facilitate that, for example, by, or regions can facilitate that. So there might be people who are already effective English medium education teachers who can then learn how to educate others, how to take a leading role in this network, train others how to take leading roles themselves. So this becomes like a sustainable model where everybody is improving, and the people who are able to are disseminating their good practice to others. So I'm happy to take questions on that. I'm happy to give examples of where we've been involved with other countries and other regions around the world, because we have examples of what's taken place before. But for now, I will just say thank you very much. It's been good to speak to you, and I look forward to meeting you when we meet face to face. So thank you very much and take care.